Hi, this is Shane Petzer speaking here for PPR 491 Week 8. I'm looking at Quaker identities from the perspective of local context in the East African experience. And just at the outset, I wanted to say something about colonialism and colonization. I think it's very easy to be talking about European colonization, and I think that when we speak about colonization in that respect, I think we need to be very specific about mentioning that it's European colonization that we're talking about, because Africa has been colonized by all sorts of people over millennia, and particularly in East Africa, we see evidence going right back to 2,500 years before the Common Era of Kushite settlers, and by the first millennium in the Common Era of Arab and Persian colonization and colonial outposts being established in that area. So a lot of colonizing has happened, contributing to a very long extended history of intertribal and ethnic conflicts. So it's not just the more recent colonizations, which I think most people speak about. In the second slide, I just wanted to locate Kenya as a country in the sort of east coast of Africa, and just to talk about East Africa under British colonialism, and to say that the late 19th century saw expanded British colonial activity in what was known as British East Africa, and that it wasn't until the 1920s that the colony of Kenya proper was established under the amalgamated with the Sultanate of Zanzibar, and that the narrative, the story of the the anti-colonial liberation movements stretched right across into the 60s, and perhaps more poignantly, Harold Macmillan's speech to the South African Parliament in Cape Town in February 1960, where he described this anti-colonial sentiment and movements as part of the winds of change, and led to what was known as the famous winds of change speech in February 1960. I think you can't look at Quaker, the shaping of Quaker, the Quaker Church as it's come to be known in Kenya, without looking at the context of anti-European colonial revolutionary activity in Africa in general, and then particularly in East Africa, with the advent of the Mau Mau revolutionaries under Kenyatta, and the very famous Dini ya Sambwa movement by Elijah Masinde, which was founded in the 1930s, which was largely seen as an anti-white church, and sort of evolved into some kind of a syncretistic, politico-religious, anti-colonial movement. And sort of interspersed in all of this was the sort of shifts to the indigenization of churches in Kenya at the time. So just in terms of looking at how this impacted on Kenyan Quakers, I think the readings this week gave us a very complex and complicated history of the enormous splits in the Quaker Church, and that the sort of first start, the sort of first step towards um, moving towards independence, away from the sort of Friends United meeting, 5 years meeting, colonial style, missionary style, established church where white missionaries held particular religious and administrative power in established Friends churches across Kenya, and that this sort of move can be seen to sort of started around 1945, and because of the sort of colonial laws at the time, administrative property rights for the establishment proper of what became known as East Africa Yearly Meeting didn't really materialize until the 60s. So one needs to sort of see the sort of shift in power from the Friends African Mission, driven by Friends, what was Friends United, what became Friends United meeting, to an indigenous formation of a Friends Church. Took a long period of time. So by the time we sort of started seeing the splits into the north and south in the 70s, and Central Yearly Meeting, and then more recently the the Nairobi Yearly Meeting, which came about in April 1987. And from my discussions with local friends in the yearly meeting, where I'm from, which is Central and Southern African yearly meeting, is that the splits in the East African yearly meeting were largely centered around personalities, ethnic tensions, old conflicts, which kind of manifested themselves into the reshaping of Quakerism in East Africa. East African Quakerism is largely very Christocentric. It sort of follows, by and large, a pastoral model, with most pastors being paid, some undertaking pastoral services voluntarily. And I was very interested in reading the Friends Church in Kenya statement. I mean, a very plain, simple document, something that you would see on many Quaker documents. And I just loved the John 15:14 quote. It says, "You are my friends, you do what I command," really suggesting that East African Friends take the Bible very seriously, and but in common with other friends, this kind of political consciousness in calling for peace, being demonstratively involved in peace action. That's not dissimilar, outwardly, as what you would see in other friends' yearly meetings. But I just found the letter and the readings quite fascinating, and that it sort of reiterated this sort of very strong biblical tradition, and the sort of a call to biblical authority. Yep. Thank you very much for hearing me.